popular demand. We had the first session on October the 26th. And Peter Love is also an energy management consultant and author of an open access book on energy management. So over to you, Peter, and I'll help out with the Q&A when that comes around.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Jill, and welcome everybody. Hopefully next time we do this, it'll be in person, but at least the advantage of being in Zoom is that we have people from across the country, and that's sort of interesting as well. So I'm just going to give a few opening comments on climate change and energy. I think it's something that we all, to varying degrees, have studied and understand, but I just want to make sure that we have an agreed principles here going forward. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has issued a series of reports. The first in this series was in August, and it was a sort of a science document where they looked at the science of climate change, and they concluded that the temperature had gone up 1 degree and that the human influence was unequivocal. So we know what's happened, we know it's bad, we know what's getting worse. In March of this year, last month, they also released a report on impacts, what impacts climate change is happening now and in the future. And of course, that was quite a awakening to get an understanding of that. And most recently, a few weeks ago, they issued the third in this series, which is really most relevant for our discussion today, because it was on mitigation. And mitigation is what you can do about it. So we know the science is there. We know that the impacts have happened and will get worse. So the real focus of the third report and the focus of this webinar is on what we can do. And one of the findings out of the report in March was that it is bad, but we do have time. It wasn't completely saying we're finished. We do have time, but action is needed soon. And to put it into Canadian context, because these international reports obviously are dealing with everywhere, our climate has actually changed more in Canada than it has in the rest of the world. It's about 2 degrees. The average in the world is about 1 degree. So we are experiencing more impacts than other parts of the world. The other 2 things I'll just mention, and if you're going to remember 2 numbers, I hope these would be your 2 numbers you take away from today. 82% of our man-made homogenic greenhouse gas emissions in Canada are from the production and use of energy. So energy is causing our climate change. We know that. There's some other things that also represent 18%, but 82% is energy. And that's why we're focusing on energy today. The other thing to keep in mind, we waste about 60% of our energy. So our energy system in Canada is very inefficient, and there's huge opportunities to improve. There's added benefits of energy efficiency as well in terms of employment, the economy, and other environmental features. And I just want to stand up now and just sometimes it's useful to actually see something in writing. So this is something my kids made for me. So I'm just going to show you my shirt here. It's warming. It's us. We're sure it's bad and we can fix it. And I think that sums up climate change issues. My frustration with a lot of environmentalists is, and from David Suzuki to Al Gore and even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they focus on the first 4, how bad it is, and how sure they are it's bad. I focus, and I think this panel today is really going to focus on the 5th one. We can fix it. So let's talk about the solutions, because presenting people with problems without a solution is very ineffective. And in most cases, people are just going to completely turn off. So we have a great panel today. I'm going to ask them to have some opening comments, and we're going to start from the international, from Nigeria. And then we're going to go to the provincial level, then the municipal level, and then we're going to look at the work being done at the academic level. So we're going to start off, and I'll ask Lillian, who's speaking to us at 10 o'clock at night from Nigeria. So we really appreciate her patience and hanging in there with us. So Lillian, we're delighted to have you, and we welcome to hear your opening thoughts.
Thank you. So I'm sharing perspectives from Nigeria and a few other developing countries where we're bound to address climate change challenges in keeping with our commitment to international environmental instruments. like the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. Our challenges in energy efficiency are majorly due to a lack of evidence-based policymaking and regulations that stem from such approach. And that would also encompass the economic and institutional dimensions. There's also the challenge of education, which could, in the context of climate change, operate to substitute unsustainable behavior and promote efficient consumption patterns and waste management practices. But much of the available information is scientific and technical and not readily available in the language that everybody can understand and act on. Recently, we launched an energy transition plan, which would allow us transition in such a way that we do not also become a major polluter in our quest for development. But at the close of COP26, we saw wealthier nations and some international finance institutions committing to stop further public investment in fossil fuels, including natural gas, which for us is not just a transition fuel, but the mainstay of our economy, because up to about 90% of our export value is oil and gas. And not just Nigeria, but Ghana, Gabon, South Sudan, the Congo, and Angola are also in this category. But with the war in Ukraine and Russia's threat to cut gas supplies to the EU and the West, we have seen in the recent part, in about 2 weeks now, the past 2 weeks, the EU returning to tip countries like Nigeria and Angola to increase their gas supplies to guarantee its own energy security. But like Nigeria, many developing countries also have great potential in renewables, particularly solar, small hydro, and biofuels. But we still have the challenges of high take-up cost, weak intellectual property regimes that don't guarantee enough protection for innovators and intellectual proprietors. And there's the issue of huge subsidies that are available to fossil fuel sectors, and renewables are not yet able to compete, even though there are financial incentives like zero taxes or zero custom duties for import of renewable energy equipment. And I will mention the political economy of decision-making in a country like Nigeria, which goes for maybe every other developing country. And by this, I mean in the context of climate change, the often difficult task of policymakers or politicians to balance the need to deliver quickly on electoral promises with investment in the climate issues or in the environment generally, because they need to show immediate benefits, and decarbonizing the economy is a process that requires immediate costs for long-term benefits. And political leaders often do not have the luxury of time. But however, we believe that more education, formal, informal, public awareness, training, access to information, evidence-based policy making, and a systems thinking approach to policy design, by which I mean us seeing the interconnectedness between sectors like energy, transport, agriculture, and domestic energy use generally, and then attacking.
So, Lillian, we're getting into some of these more issues in more detail later. Can you just finish up?
Certainly.
Okay.
Certainly.
Great. Just make a final comment, your final conclusion, or make a final comment, and we'll move on.
Okay, so we also believe that rethinking public financing and being more proactive in public expenditure hold a lot of promise for us as developing countries in addressing climate change.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And I'm sure there's going to be some questions. And I want to mention to everybody that we're having sort of a 3 or 4 minute introductory comments from our panelists, and then we're going to be opening it for questions. Last time we did this, there were so many questions, we didn't get to them all. So please have your questions ready. This is really for a chance for you to ask anything you ever wanted to ask about energy and energy management. And we've got people this time from around the world. So we're delighted to have Lillian speak to us. Okay, next we've got Andrew Peep Salmon, who's going to speak to us about BC. He's recently been appointed a utility commissioner there, and Andrew's someone I've known for a long time and respected a great deal. So Andrew, give us your thoughts.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon and good evening in Abuja. I'm going to speak about energy demand side measures and distributed energy resources. While this might sound bureaucratic or maybe even esoteric, these are things people can do to make a difference with the support of their energy provider, property manager, building developer, equipment retailer, or contractor. And it'll make a significant difference for their lives, business, and institutions that they work with to make life more affordable, sustainable, and resilient. So demand side measures, or DSM, and distributed energy resources, or DES, are things energy consumers can do to conserve energy, use purchased energy more efficiently, shift consumption to non-peak periods, otherwise known as load management, generate energy on site, and/or store energy. While many of these are autonomously advanced or voluntarily advanced by consumers, they intersect with our utilities extensively, despite being on the customer side of the meter. So these are all private transactions. They're not the actions of BC Hydro or Toronto Hydro. So while many, so some examples: monitoring and prompting. So smart meters. I can look up my many of my loads in my house with an app and the smart meter. Consumption education, energy labels on houses and equipment. Carbon pricing just went up on April 1st in British Columbia. Rates, energy rates are very powerful. Conservation rates. Load management. I'm in a program called Peak Rewards, where I've seeded an opportunity to BC Hydro to turn off my electric baseboard heaters for 30 seconds at a time, and I don't even notice it, so they can avoid purchasing power from the market, for example. Technology education, really important. So I'm going to go out and buy a heat pump. What's an HSPF? What's a SEER? Audits and energy modeling. This is to inform my decision as a consumer. Financing, property assessed clean energy financing. Halifax, Nova Scotia, and the whole province of Nova Scotia has the best in Canada for financing. Leadership branding. We have this thing in Victoria called the 2030 district, and in Toronto, where buildings have signed up to lead by example, to decarbonize 10 years early. Supply chain capacity building, like mandatory training for builders, incentives, tax policy, benchmarking, so I can track that the retrofit that I did, the investment I made is actually performing. Net metering, where I can invest in solar and bank my excess electricity in the grid. And finally, regulation, which is not very popular, but it's kind of the final step. So in the old days, we lived simple lives in Canada and our energy needs were affordable. And the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change of 1992 didn't really affect our choices. But since then, prominent players such as the Office of Energy Efficiency in Canada have been advancing the field of energy efficiency. And now we're 30 years later. We have our Clean BC roadmap to 2030 in British Columbia that will phase out fossil fuel equipment by 2030. Reduce emissions in buildings by 60%. And there's been some little mini disasters, like last year, Texas had a blackout because they didn't secure enough natural gas, and a combination of factors caused one of their major nuclear plants to shut down. This was a market failure. So if we did things differently and we empowered consumers through demand side measures even more and democratized the energy transition, then we could avoid a situation of a blackout like I just described.
Okay, Andrew, can you just wrap up in a minute?
Final thoughts. Yep. Okay. The grid will be more resilient. They will enhance our buildings, our transportation choices, and our communities. And by involving consumers, the necessary cost increases for decarbonizing energy supplies will be palatable, possibly zero for bill impact. And to reinforce my final comment, Dr. Iriaga's point, by involving consumers and collecting data from the market, we can also ensure government policy is evidence-based. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's great. Okay, so we've started at the international, we've talked about the province, and now we're going to go down to the city, and this is where the rubber really hits the road. Ali's been a manager, an energy manager, at a number of cities in BC, and he's going to give us the perspective from someone that's actually dealing with this on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis. I know when we've had calls in the past, sometimes he's had to to go out and actually handle a situation, which Andrew and I don't have to do. We just talk about things. Ali actually does them. So Ali, give us your perspective on what it's really like when you're dealing with problems.
All right, thank you, Peter. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. Just a couple of comments. First of all, I work at the township of Langley right now. I think it was mentioned City of Vancouver. Just a quick correction. Yeah, thank you for the time. What I'm doing now, I was working under facilities and sustainability, and we have over the last couple of years, a lot of the municipalities declared climate emergency, which is basically acknowledging that something needs to change. And shortly after, over the following year, a lot have been developing these climate action plans or climate action strategies. So right now we have one developed at the township, and it aims to aligns with the IPCC recommendations of reducing emissions by 45% by 2030 and being carbon neutral by 2050. We also took in the spirit of leadership, which is huge. I think Andrew also mentioned it. We decided that for corporate operations within the township, because the climate action strategy focuses on the corporate side, which is everything that the township operates, roads, utilities, buildings, community centers, fleets, stuff like that. And also on the community side, meaning all the buildings, all the industrial, commercial, institutional sector, agriculture, and such. And some might think that a small building doesn't really, what impact do I have? But I think we talked about this last panel discussion, is that within cities we have over 70% of global emissions, right? And there's cities are getting denser and denser, and people are moving more and more within cities, so that's gonna be only increase with time. And my focus now within this has been, I've been now working more on planning how to decarbonize our corporate facilities. And these plans have been, it's a big challenge, and it's a very large scope, because we want to have plans as detailed as possible that can help us have, actionable plans, and also more accurate capital plans that we can take to our management and secure external funding with. So in terms of what I'm going to focus on is basically mostly on buildings, mostly on commercial buildings. And buildings have a role, I believe it's around 40% of global emissions are happening in buildings. So one note I will make is that such plans to decarbonize buildings will be very different in different jurisdictions. So it would depend on what the climate is, what energy sources are available, what policies and incentives are available, what utility rates are like, and also what technologies might work. For example, and Dr. Iriagi mentioned, solar can be very effective in Nigeria, for example. We have solar here as well, but our focus might be more on leveraging the clean electricity that we have from BC Hydro. So maybe our focus on technology will be more limited on heat pumps, not limited, I would say, but more leaning or more common with technologies such as heat pumps and air to water heat pumps in particular. So,
Ellie, can you just wrap up? Yep.
Sure. Yeah. I'm just gonna say, yeah, I can definitely answer a lot of questions on such plans, developing these plans. We call them low carbon retrofit plans. And one of the big opportunities, I would say, in terms of why to do this, which can be expensive over time, is a lot of it is going to be risk mitigation. You know, if we're talking to investors in real estate now, a lot of them will be focused on trying to future-proof and not willing to invest in something now that you know, carbon price is going to be $170 per ton in BC and Canada by 2030, and IPCC forecasted $1,800 per ton by 2050. So that is quite significant for infrastructure that will be there if investments are made today within 30 years.
Okay,
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, now coming closer to home, we're coming down to the two professors at Yorkville. Amit does a lot of work with industrial energy efficiency and energy auditing. So Amit, give us your opening thoughts.
Hi, and good afternoon, and all present here. So recently, I just published a paper in Emerald Journal where I discussed about carbon trading. Yes, as Andrew was saying and Dr. Ali was saying about carbon pricing is rising. So paying a carbon tax is not a good alternative. So alternative is carbon trading. Now question comes, what is carbon trading? So carbon trading is a process of buying and selling permits and credits that allow the permit holder to emit carbon dioxide. So Canada is emitting a significant amount of carbon dioxide. We found that in 2016 data is saying that waste management generates about 2.6% of the total emitted carbon dioxide, about 19 metric ton of carbon dioxide. Then industrial process products, they are contributing about 7.6. Transportation is contributing a lot, about 28.3, and so on. So economy has been increased by about 18% in last 6 years, but still we have lot of problems of greenhouse gases that are being emitted from transportation, use of fuel for heating and electricity, use of fossil fuels, and we have to think, we have to have a thought on these processes. We are clearing forest, agriculture, fertilizer, releasing a lot of greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide. So carbon credit trading is the alternative. It has a potential to impact society positively, which will result into reduction of global warming, less flooding, improved ecological balance, and this may also lessen the level of pollution and reducing related diseases such as asthma, heart, lung problems, which are being caused by this pollution. And I will say that we are talking about climate change. So change is the law of life. And never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens, they can change the world. Go green, breathe clean, better environment, better tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Emma, thank you very much. Very nice ending from Margaret Mead. Okay, and so Rita, you're going to be the wrap this all up and tie it all together and give us your perspective on these issues.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Thank you. Thanks to my colleagues for the insightful opening statements. They have said it all. But I would like to reiterate the points that they have highlighted, and I would start by sharing a thought with everyone. Last week, I had this thought kept pondering on my mind, wondering how I would feel if my children or my grandchildren asked me in the future, Mama or Grandma, is this the best that your generation could do for us? You know, that thought triggered this desire, that desire in me to do more, to do better, to translate words to actions. Because the truth is, we no longer have an excuse not to act. We can't afford to say we don't know what to do, because the recent IPCC reports have laid bare the causes consequences and solutions to climate change. And my colleagues have also mentioned the same. The recent reports explicitly stated the need to reduce energy consumption across all sectors, buildings, transport, even in our nutrition. Now, so given the urgency to reduce global warming, we need strategic and well-targeted approaches to address climate change and avert a catastrophic future. Fortunately, the recent IPCC report also has provided a kind of roadmap for us to avert that catastrophic future. From the report, it is evident that we need solutions such as energy efficiency to quickly reduce our energy consumption and redesign the way we run our economies. Energy efficiency, interestingly, energy efficiency is one of the solutions that is crucial in achieving sufficient decarbonization and to stay within our global carbon budget. And it can actually help us achieve a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by between 40 to 70%, and that is quite significant. It is also important for us to actually note that energy efficiency is a mitigation and adaptation strategy. So it's really crucial, and it will play a very important role in our transition process as we transition, in our energy system. Another interesting thing about energy efficiency, which is the core of our discussion today, is that it is one of the ways that we can decouple the correlation between economic growth and energy consumption. Some of us might wonder what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying in essence is that it is a smart way to keep growing our economy while protecting our environment and conserving our resources. It might also interest us to know that energy efficiency is one of the cheapest, the safest, most effective, and cleanest options to address climate change. Though we might not have paid much attention to energy efficiency in the past, but I would say now is the time. Now is the time to really foster these measures to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and to enable us achieve the goal to stay well below 2 degrees Celsius, which is in line with the Paris Agreement. So, but having said all of that, it is also important to note that it will require government's support through policies, through funding to really pursue and achieve this goal. I would like to stop at that for now.
Okay, we'll come back and we're going to talk about some of those policies.
Questions come up.
So that'll be great. Thank you very much, Rita. And I love your question about asking what would you say to your children and grandchildren. So I think that's, I wish more people would ask that question and have a good answer. One of my few roles was to introduce and to have play a introductory video that Amit has created, and I forgot all about it. So I think what we'd like to do now is we're going to play this sort of a very fun, creative video that I hope will stimulate some further questions and thoughts. It's sort of a summary of what we're talking about here today, but it's in a playful, fun sort of way. So let's play that. And while we're playing it, please have your questions ready to go. And Jill, do you want people to post them online or to put their hand up?
You can put them up in the Q&A, I think.
Okay, well, please, put your questions in the Q&A. Great.
And I'm going to ask Kazan Kalada to share Dr. Amit's energy management video.
Great.
Hopefully we've got some sound there, and this will summarize some of the speaking points.
painted using Powtoon. All right, Amit, thank you. Round of applause. I hope you get an Emmy next year, but I hope no one slaps you when you pick it up. So anyway, we should enter it. It was bravo.
Mhm.
Thanks
We've
so
got
much.
some interesting questions coming in for the panel.
Okay. So Jill, do you want to moderate those?
Sure, great. I'll turn them over to you, Peter. I'm curious, Andrew Foyerchuk says, I'm curious about our achievements to date in the energy sector. Is it true that Alberta produces some of the cleanest oil and natural gas in the world? And I think Andrew paid some and wanted to start off
All right,
addressing
and Andrew, you want
Alberta's.
to take that one on? Yeah.
Mhm.
Great. So obviously Alberta Oil, Saskatchewan Oil, British Columbia Oil. There's really two types. There's the Western sedimentary, the legacy resources that built our oil industry. And there's the oil sands mining in Fort McMurray. And I think, as a starting point, we're amongst the highest emitting countries in the world with when it comes to oil sands. But I think the democracy of Canada and the imperative to take action on climate change is driving governments to set emissions caps on the oil industry. And so over the next decade, I think we're going to see our Alberta oil supply, oil sands, become among the best in the world. It looks like Denmark has the lowest carbon intensity for their oil supply, and the highest, at least a few years ago, was Algeria. And we're with heavy oil, we're in there with Venezuela and others, but with technology innovation and our major oil sands provider, Suncor, has set a number of objectives to decarbonize. And I think efficiency is going to be a critical aspect of that. And also using renewable energy or zero carbon energy to support the industry. So that's oil. For gas, people might have seen last week that Shell Canada announced an intention to double LNG Canada's capacity. So that's out of Prince Rupert, Northeast British Columbia natural gas from fracking via pipeline to Prince Rupert. And this is all in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Germany and Europe being dependent on Russian natural gas. So we're going to displace with our LNG from Canada, we're going to displace some of those supplies from countries like Qatar and Africa, LNG going to Europe. And it will be, I believe, according to the news release last week, some of the cleanest LNG in the world, because we're going to use zero carbon electricity to compress the natural gas. So we call that electric drive rather than gas drive. So stay tuned.
Thank you. And I'll just add that the other thing that's happening in Alberta, they're certainly talking about, is using carbon capture, utilization, and storage, CCUS, as a way to remove the carbon. And that's one of the ways that once they do that, I think, Andrew, you're right. Alberta's oil even the oil from the oil sands will be much cleaner. And just on LNG, I was really interested to read the other day that, and I think we've got somebody in the panel here, or somebody online today from New Brunswick, that in St. John, there was an LNG terminal there. It's an import terminal, and it was meant to bring in LNG into New Brunswick and to serve the Atlantic provinces. And they're now looking to actually reverse the machinery and make it into an export terminal. And again, that would be available to take gas from the northeastern U.S. and in Canada, and put it in an LNG tanker and ship it over to Europe. And Germany is the process right now of building 2 LNG ports. Anybody else in the panel want to comment on that? And then I'll turn it back to Andrew to make sure we've answered his question.
Sorry, even our Honorable Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he makes a clean vehicle announcement in BC. Yeah, I just want to add that government is also pushing, and they are talking about carbon capturing, storage, utilization, as discussed by Dr. Peter.
Yes, I think the Canadian government has committed to 2035 for the sale of vehicles that are emission-free.
Mhm. All right, and it looks like, Andrew, you were satisfied and you've got a thumbs up on that, so that's great. Good. And Jill, do we have another question?
Well, maybe this will go back to Lillian, Dr. Lillian's point. Do you think that the restrictions on, let me see, I'm losing my question here. Do you think that the restrictions on energy, export of energy, will continue to drive up the price when we're all worried about rising fuel prices and compel countries to fast track alternatives? I'm thinking of the effects of the OPEC oil crisis.
Okay, the first time I read about Russia's threat, my first thought is maybe energy insecurity is here to stay. Not perpetually, but there might be circumstances beyond the control of countries that could put them at risk of energy insecurity. So yes, I think that Russia's threat will continue to drive up prices, because our first reaction in Nigeria was, wow, we can sell so much gas now. But we also have the challenge of financing, which I mentioned earlier. We're at risk of fresh investments not coming in to fund gas projects. And but will alternatives be fast enough? That's another question. In the light of the fact that it's just a threat, we don't know if Russia is going to stay true to it. If it does, we don't know for how long. So yes, I believe that these will validate the need for countries to fast track alternatives. But going back to OPEC, OPEC regulates production and just how much of it and how much you can sell it. So while the EU and the US is tipping us to produce more gas, we are looking to the US for funding. And though OPEC has raised our quota, we're not able to meet it up because we do not have fresh investment to raise our daily quota production. So I think between OPEC, the threat, and then the need to fast track alternatives, it just brings to light again that fast tracking is the way to go. But how fast we are going to fast track depends on just how much resources nations have available to them. Because what the EU is looking to do is to diversify its sources of energy supply. And Nigeria and some African countries that have high production of gas happen to be the places they're looking to. So yes, I strongly agree that this threat will drive up prices and compel countries to not only fast track, but validate their attempts to fast track and continue doing so. So I hope that addresses the question.
I'll just add a comment here, and some of you may have seen this picture. I'll show it up there. This is the head of the UN and his Antonio Guterres, who on the release of the UN report said that addiction to fossil fuels is mutually assured destruction. So we do need a transition. It's not going to happen tomorrow, and I think he recognizes that. But we do need to be able to move away from our use of fossil fuels. And we can start with using cleaner fossil fuels like natural gas and cleaner oil than dirtier oil, but eventually we're just going to have to really get ourselves right off it. And it is going to be a painful, expensive process. Anybody else in the panel want to comment on that?
Yeah,
I was doing one. Yeah, sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just briefly, I just think it's so important to democratize energy in this situation, and I think Germany is facing that right now. You know, they're captive to Russian oil and gas, but if we were to follow the example of California or even the state of Hawaii, where you know, distributed energy resources and storage and energy efficiency and load management empowers consumers to respond to high prices, then really it becomes a shared responsibility. It's not just the central governments and utilities, but also the public, because the inevitability is the Russian invasion is going to raise energy prices. The decarbonization of energy supplies is going to raise energy prices. So a bad outcome would be that the consumers are captive and unable to respond. And that's why we need demand side measures. Thanks.
Yes, continue to the Dr. Peter, as he said that fossil fuels we have to change. So one research I was reading, and it was saying that about if coal-fired power plant we are using 500 megawatt, it will be emitting about 3 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. Can you believe 500 megawatt coal-fired power plant emitting 3 million tons of carbon dioxide per year? And if the amount of GHG is not avoided, we are going to plant more than 62 million trees and waiting for 10 years for them to grow.
Yeah.
62 million.
Trees. Yeah.
I just wanted to add something to that, and I quite agree with what Andrea said regarding demand side management, and taking measures to reduce our energy consumption. But I also want to say that the Russian crisis is more of an eye opener for countries, especially countries in the EU. It's an eye opener because one of the things that the IPCC report stated was that different regions have different challenges, and for EU it was more of lack of political leadership and sense of low sense of urgency to respond. So I think this Russian crisis now is going to trigger that urgency in them and want them to want to look the other way and invest more in cleaner technologies rather than relying on Russia, and make them to become, spur them to become more energy independent, so that they don't have to rely on other countries or being held captive by a country because of energy supply.
So I think, Rita, we have more social awareness now about the climate change.
Mhm.
Kind of.
What incentives are there through the UN and other agencies, Lillian, to invest in energy production in Nigeria and developing countries?
Will you take that again?
Well, I'm just wondering what incentives do various countries and organizations like the UN offer? You say it takes a great amount of investment to diversify energy supply, gas supply. You have it, but you don't have the investment dollars to really develop that capacity.
Mhm.
So what infrastructure exists, or what agreements exist to help you get investments?
Okay, first of all, under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, there are a lot of funding mechanisms that could flow from richer developed countries to poorer or seemingly less developed countries, like clean development mechanisms, climate change funds, and then special funds that could be channeled to economic incentives to enable countries to decarbonize. But we have issues of technical capacity and institutional ability to position well enough to attract such funding, because there are criteria to meet. And like I mentioned earlier, we're not very intentional with mainstreaming financing into public expenditure. So making it mostly about what you get from outside through technical cooperation, official development assistance, really puts us at a disadvantage. So while those incentives are there, we're not strong enough, or we do not have enough capacity to harness it to its fullest. So we have that challenge of poor institutional capacity.
Mhm. Right.
Maybe I'll offer in Glasgow, the Article 6 was the rules for Article 6 of the Paris Agreement were finally signed. So that would allow a Canadian oil and gas company that does fracking. And here in British Columbia, we're very proud that we've eliminated all fugitive emissions, or we're working towards that as it relates to natural gas fracking. We also recycle 100% of the water. We could export that technology to Nigeria and receive credit. And so I actually don't think really the UN needs to get involved. I think this is a private sector transaction. And Nigerian oil and gas has become extremely valuable as a result of the Russian invasion. It was before, and it's even more so now. And I think the private sector will respond. And that Article 6 is an emerging mechanism to have a payment for the emission reductions that occur in Nigeria.
Thank you. That was my next question, whether it would be done more efficiently through private investors. And that brings in Amit's point about private credit trading, I think. So.
And also just the UN is not an organization that has funding. They just, they barely have the ability to keep the peace. Well, they won't really. I mean, so they're hugely challenged, and they can say nice words, but they're hugely limited. But I think the Article 6 that Andrew mentioned is a really interesting one. So I want to turn to a really interesting question, and I'm going to comment on it from Dawn here in Alberta. Energy is very politicized, and I used to be on a board in Alberta, so I certainly know that. Any suggestions on how to shift the discussion to energy rather than strictly oil and gas? And before I turn that over to the panel, I was really struck by that question, because here in Ontario, of course, we don't have any significant oil and gas. When you talk to people about energy in Ontario, it's all about electricity. It's nuclear plants and wind turbines and solar collectors and EVs and everything to do with electricity. Our challenge in Ontario is to get people to realize that about 38% of our emissions, our greenhouse gas emissions in Ontario, come from transportation. So oil and gas is a big part of what we need to focus on. But I agree with you, though. I think it is very politicized, and the focus in Alberta, and I'd say Saskatchewan, is on oil and gas. I think BC is a bit more balanced, Andrew. I think that the discussion, and because you've got both hydro and oil and gas, maybe it's one where it is a bit more balanced. But maybe, Andrew, you want to take a shot at any thoughts on that, and how to depoliticize it and broaden the discussion so that people in Alberta and Saskatchewan are thinking of oil, energy generally, not just oil and gas.
Sure, thank you. It takes time. Gordon Campbell, the former Premier of British Columbia, introduced North America's first carbon tax. And he's on the, if you will, the business side of the political spectrum. And at the time, the other side was opposed to it because it's taxing the people. But now the NDP government is in power, and they have expanded upon the carbon tax. So I think the first answer is it takes time. And I think Alberta is on the verge of that, because they had a government that introduced climate progressive measures that were then undone when the current government came in. But the current government now, thanks to the Supreme Court case that has reaffirmed the jurisdiction of the federal government to price carbon, they're now coming back to that earlier political party's views. But the more important answer is we need to shift it away from the vertical silos of fuels, shift it sideways and into the sectors of the economy. So buildings, transportation, industry. And for the first time, British Columbia completed what I call an integrated supply side, demand side strategy or plan. And it's called the Clean BC Roadmap to 2030. It will deliver a 60% reduction in energy use in buildings, 40% overall across the economy by 2030, And the way they did it is they flipped it to a sectoral perspective rather than an energy resource perspective. And what that does is it forces us to look at all available options to meet transportation demand. So that includes EVs, electric vehicles, hydrogen, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, fossil fuels, natural gas. It looks at all the fuels from the perspective of transportation and what makes sense for trains, for trucks, for big trucks, for small trucks, long distance trucks, short distance trucks, and personal vehicles. Thank you.
Continuing to Dr. Andrew, I think that in BC, we are thinking of green building now. So we are working on green building where we are also thinking of green roofs. In green building, we are utilizing radiant floor and we are utilizing gray water recycling, solar power, energy efficient window systems. All this we are trying in BC.
Okay. I hope that, Dawn, that answered your question. Any other questions, Jill, or anybody else want to?
Well, one attendee wants to know if COVID-19 is increasing the demand on residential energy usage. And how can we deal with that?
Yeah, I'll start off, and that's a really interesting one. The studies aren't out yet, but certainly one of the implications of it, and this is where Andrew talks, I think, very intelligently about looking at different sectors. One of the implications of COVID-19, which is going to have a huge impact, is our mobility and where people work. And I think people for 2 years worked at home. And I think now almost everybody has returned to some sort of hybrid. So there is less commuting by the car or by public transit, and that's going to force us to rethink things. But certainly the extent to which people no longer take cars or don't fly to conferences, people are getting used to doing webinars like this. And this, if this was done and a few of us had flown around, it would have been a much larger carbon footprint. So the transportation side is a benefit. I guess when people work at home, if they were really good at using their programmable thermostat, and when they left in the morning to go to the office, they would turn it down and then bring it back up when they got home. However, there's so many multi-generations now in homes. I think homes are more heavily used, but anyway, it's an interesting issue. One of the implications in the office environment is improved indoor air quality and improved ventilation, which can be done, but there's an energy cost to it. You do need energy to run the indoor air quality ventilators. But maybe I could turn to the panel for, I think this is a really good question. Anybody have other comments on the impact of COVID-19 on energy?
It's
Yeah,
increased
sure.
my electricity bill quite a bit working from home. I don't know how I've used that much, but I know I like light and heat.
The truth is there are different ways we can reduce energy consumption in our homes. That's what we call conservation behavior. You just taking note of those little things. Turn off the lights when it's not in use, unplug your laptop if you're not working, put off the TV if you're not watching it. And, all the simple things like switching your bulbs, maybe from incandescent bulbs to LEDs. You can incorporate these little things into your home to help reduce your consumption. But I think conservation behavior goes a very, very long way. And I mean, I'm speaking from experience. There are times when I'm working, it's cold, I don't want to turn on the heater. I just go wear my cardigan, rather than turn on the heater. So these are little ways, little things that we can do to actually reduce our energy consumption. Because the truth is that this consumption is going to increase for most of us, working from home or doing a hybrid system. But we need to also play that part, and that is why it has to be a collective effort to address the issue of climate change. We all have to do our little bits. Like I was telling my students, if I turn off the light when I'm not using it, and 1 million people do the same thing, at that time or that day, imagine how much energy we will be saving. So yes, consumption would increase, but you can actually curtail it.
So I should turn those lights off, Rita, and put on another sweater.
If you're not
While I'm
using it,
working
turn it
from
off.
home.
Yeah, just briefly, so BC Hydro has studied the issue, as Fortis Electric, and I'll put a link in the chat. So there is a demand increase to residential, and they're saying that, you know, the question is, when will COVID end? And it hasn't ended, right? We're on our who knows what wave, but they're saying that people will continue to work from home. So for those who are interested in the topic of energy utilities, the link I'm going to put in the chat it's a 1,000-page document, but this is the essence of energy planning right here. And if you go to chapter 3, you can see the documented impacts of COVID-19 on BC Hydro.
Okay, good. Thank you, Andrew. Okay.
There's a question here from Chadas Didaglu. He says, thanks for arranging such a timely event and the excellent talks. This panel's comprehensive approach is critical as climate change creates a complex, multifaceted challenge. This should also encourage us to look beyond adaptation and mitigation activities based on individual behavior changes. And his question is, how can we overcome the knowledge action gap? And I think that's where I'm lacking, is the gap between knowledge and doing something, caused by reliance solely on individual consumer behavior rather than system level political economic structures and community level action in order to achieve climate justice.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So let me start. It's an issue that that I've had a great deal of interest in my whole career, really, and I'm starting to spend more time on it now. Trying to look at how you motivate people to take action, and I've just written a paper on it. So there's a few things that I think are important. 5 of them. The first is, I think it's important to be positive. Don't tell people what not to do. Encourage people to do something positive. People don't like being told what to do to start with, and they certainly don't like it when people say don't do this and don't do that. So at least frame it as a positive, that we want you to do something that is it's positive. I think it's useful if it's easy, and there's been a lot of work done by this on behavioral economists and behavioral psychologists. And as an example, for instance, it used to be really difficult to convince people to sign into pension plans because they were asked a question, do you want to be a part of a pension plan? And 90% of the people just ignore it. They don't want to have to read it. They don't want to go through the paperwork. It's probably better that they did it, but they don't do it. If you turn it around and frame it so that you're part of the pension plan, click here if you do not want to be part of the pension plan, and almost everybody signs up. They just don't want to be bothered. So I think making things easy for people is really important. One of the other ones is to talk about it. We're talking about things that are hard to see. Energy efficiency is in the walls, it's in the mechanical room. It's really hard to see. So you only, unlike recycling or air pollution or water pollution, so you only see it, you only know about it because someone talks to you about it. So I think it's really important that people talk about it. And we just got my quick notes here. The other things that I would say is it's really important to customize the messaging. Don't have one generic message for everybody. People are different, and marketers have known this for years. So I think we need to customize our messages. And the last one I'm really interested in, there was a really successful campaign here in Ontario and Toronto for a sick children's hospital. And they wanted to raise $1.3 billion, B with a billion. And they knew they had to do something completely different. They needed to reach out to people. And they decided after a strategy session to in effect, make it a battle. It was a war. We're taking on cancer, and we're going to help these kids and these doctors in this battle against cancer. And it blew the socks off. It was so successful. So I think there's a lot we can learn. Madison Avenue and advertisers have known this for decades, how to convince people to buy their brand. We need to learn some of those lessons when we're talking to people. So those are some of the highlights I'd offer. I'll turn it over to the panel. Anybody have some comments on that?
Yeah, Peter, I quite agree with what you've said. The truth is there are so many demand side and management programs out there that the government is offering. A lot of people don't even know about it. So I think that there should also be, there should be this awareness about these programs, awareness, educating people on how to reduce their energy consumption. There needs to be awareness. I was talking to someone the other day, and I said to the person, if we are going to address climate change, for example, the layman on the street should know what climate change is. Mm-hmm. That awareness is that's literacy, or will I say, I can call it literacy, awareness, call it whatever, but people need to know that there are things going on, that there are things that government is doing that they can participate in and be part of the solution. But until people don't have that awareness, they can't really do anything. So I think awareness is really key here.
I agree with Rita, as she said, awareness. I think if we want to change our future, we have to change our attitude. It is saying that weak minds discuss people, strong minds discuss events, and great minds discuss ideas. So as we are organizing these events, I think awareness is the key to success.
I just want to add something here on this. I think that's a very good question. Just from a local government perspective, working in sustainability within a local government, we're basically trying to sell the idea of, for example, when we're developing climate action strategy with very aggressive targets to align with IPCC, we're trying to sell these, this action plan to our senior management and council, and it's usually it requires a lot of investment, a lot of resources, competing priorities with everything else we have to do. But one of the things that really helped was public feedback and engaging with the public to know what they care about and how much they care about this issue and how much they agree with the idea of ramping up investments to address climate change. So this is something that council really listens to, is public feedback. So I would say, make your voice heard in all the means, the many mechanisms to provide feedback. Even during the presentation to council about the climate action strategy, one of the things that really drove it home is a delegation from high school students who came and presented, and they were very strong, I think, in just in their message, and helped a lot in unanimously approving the adoption of this strategy. So one might feel, what can I do as an individual? But there's just reach out to your council, to your maybe if you work in a school or if you work in elsewhere, or there's like a group or whatnot, and of course there are many mechanisms to make your voice heard in that regard, and that would drive action and adoption and investments, and then hopefully that would help.
Yep.
So
and Andrew, I see you've
educators-
got a comment about you've got a comment about Doug McKenzie Moore's work on community-based social marketing. Do you want to briefly talk about that?
Yeah, I did a little research on this topic, and in a building I worked in called the Jack Davis Building, and he was named after a great energy minister in British Columbia. And in the course of a week, we reduced electricity consumption for lighting by 12%, and statistically significantly documented it. And we used the techniques in this book. And I think just kind of the one I want to highlight is prompting. So where people visibly see the blue box, so they recycle of their neighbors, so they recycle, visibly get a prompt about, you know, it's lunchtime. If you leave, you should turn off your light. And that's one of 5 key techniques that are in there. Peter was correct. You want to promote the good practices and not penalize the poor practices. And that is empowering people. And it goes back to my first point, which is around democratization of energy management. Thank you.
That was
Jill?
my question. What
Yep.
what campaigns have worked? And I just got up and turned off my lights. I don't really need them. So
Yeah.
it worked. You're
Yeah.
making me aware.
Yeah.
There's a
Maybe
question.
Doug McKenzie Moore is someone that we might have on this panel in the future. He's based in Nova Scotia, I think, or New Brunswick. Yeah. And he's done some really interesting work in this area. Okay.
There's a question here from Mike Oliti, and I hope I've said that right, Mike. And this question goes to Dr. Idiage. He says, I'm a Nigerian living in the United States, and my question is, what is the major hindrance in your country to government solving the energy problem through renewable energy, which is maybe cheaper and cleaner? So you talked about investment before. What are some of the major challenges?
Okay, so I will speak to about 3 of them, which I consider to be major. First is the economic importance of oil and gas to the Nigerian economy. That puts renewables in the back burner. It is difficult to sell renewables to a politician or a political leader when the money he needs to run the economy and ensure that GDP keeps rising comes from oil and gas. So renewables, as much potential as we have come to know that they have, still cannot compete with oil and gas in terms of priority and making policies around it. Secondly, I mentioned earlier the need for us to rethink public financing and mainstream climate change, and by implication renewables, development of renewables into public financing, instead of assuming all the time that all the monies must come from outside the country. Share about a particular fund, a special fund is called in Nigeria. We call it the Ecological Fund. It contains 2% of all income that accrues to the federal government in a year, which amounts to billions of naira and maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, the objective of that fund, or from practice, what that fund has been used to do is to address ecological disasters nationwide, which often are reactionary because issues like deforestation, flooding, desertification, and all those ecological challenges stem from the fact of unsustainable use of energy or unsustainable production of energy. For example, use of heavy dependence on wood fuel resources leads to deforestation. But we need to rethink the use of that fund. So if we are more proactive with public financing, we might be able to ramp up development of renewable energy. But again, that is not a priority to political leaders because that fund is not very well ring-fenced. It can actually pass for anything. So you get money from there for electioneering. Money is, there's a disaster somewhere. So it's just spent on salvaging the situation. But if we rethink it, there's so much there that could be channeled to renewable energy development. And thirdly, I will mention the place of our weak intellectual property regime. It is not strong enough for an innovator, an inventor, or an intellectual property proprietor who has spent so much resources, time, and energy creating a climate, a great product maybe process, industrial design, or a product for renewable energy. So they don't find the IP regime strong enough to protect them. So we have the challenge of a lack of transfer of technology. But again, like I said, we have an energy transition plan, which has put a lot of importance on developing renewable energy resources between now and 2060, when we want to hit net zero. So hopefully, if we address all of these three, we might not need to ask this question in maybe a decade or a little over to come.
So we've got 5 more questions, and what I think I'm going to do, I've just responded to one, but what I think I might do is just ask each of the panelists to maybe put something in the chat. And I think maybe Andrew, you could help. And Gerald asked, there was mention of a 2030 building standard for energy consumption. Is there a published standard to design towards? So maybe if you could put that in the chat. And Mercy Oliti has asked, can renewable energy save money, especially in African countries? And Lillian, maybe you could put a link in the chat for that. And Andrew is asking, are there different attitudes to the environment based on income, gender, age, and demographics? Absolutely. Also, I would add, whether the belief in climate change, and then also, how do you evaluate the new built environment in terms of energy efficiency? What steps need to be taken? So evaluation of buildings is usually on an energy per square meter. And I mean, and Andrew, maybe if I could call on you, you maybe send, this is Reem Al Rawi has asked that, and maybe there's something you could put in the chat about how do you evaluate the new built environments in terms of energy efficiency, what bigger steps need to be taken. Because I do want to, we're running out of time here, and we do actually have a poll we want to run. So I'll ask our panelists to work on those questions. But I do want to, and Jill, how are we running this poll? What's the process here?
Well, I'm going to ask Kazan to open the poll, and while those questions are being answered, perhaps everyone could rank their top 4 or 5 strategies. Based on what we've discussed here today, rank the top 4 energy management strategies in order of what you would recommend or what you would prefer to reduce climate change. So 1 is your top preference or your most highly recommended one based on what you've discussed here today. And 4 is the bottom. So what's your number 1 choice, 2, 3, and 4? So let's see, we have development and use.
So how do you do this, Jill? How
do we enter our answers?
I just put in 1 and now it's saying 1 of 1 for all of them.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us how to do this, Kazan? Do we put in
see. It just takes, there's a bit of a delay, that's all.
So you can
this is intended for the participants, not the panelists, right?
Okay, all right, fine.
I'm just right. That's a question and a statement. That's not just this.
I'll get out. I just wanted to make sure it worked.
I was going to answer as well. So.
Well, I don't think it matters if you put yours in as well, Ali. If we,
sure.
But I don't know how to
put mine. That we can't vote. We cannot vote.
We can't put our answers in, just the participants.
Yeah,
that's the problem. So you and I were trying to put in answers, Peter, and we don't have a box to put them in.
Yeah, that's right. I've given up. Not allowed.
Amy says you can enter a check mark. Mm-hmm. So some of those questions were interesting. Peter, do you have any more comments about?
I think instead of marking 1, 2, 3, 4, let us say the top one. The participant should rate the top one because they cannot enter numbers, only check mark.
Okay, so check your top
Yes.
Your most recommended one. Okay. So choose your preference, your top preference.
So Andrew, thank you for posting those answers. And I got a note from Amy L. Chilad that they should have a 15-minute presentation for every Yorkville student on climate change. And it's something I've been in discussion with the president about. So I will continue to take that suggestion to her.
So it looks like we've got a tie here on these energy management strategies. 67% voted for the development and use of alternate energy sources, wind, solar, electric, other than fossil fuels. 67% for global cooperation. 67% for programs to increase home and building insulation and modifications. And 67% government programs to implement carbon credit trading practices. So either the poll doesn't work, which may be, we may not be getting the exact results, or we're all on the same wavelength. We like all of those strategies. Would you like to wrap up with one or two questions, Peter?
I don't think so. I mean, we've got we're just 8 minutes ago. What I might just do is maybe I think we've got, maybe I'll turn to the panel for sort of a last 1 minute, and it will have to be 1 minute. Just what do you what's your advice to those listening in today? What's the most effective thing that they can do? And we'll go in reverse order. We'll start with Rita.
For me, like I said the last time when we had the first webinar, is we all have a role to play in solving this challenge, this issue of climate change. We all have a role to play. I remember we shared this link where we asked people to calculate their carbon footprint and try to understand how they are impacting the environment in one way or the other. So I would say that we should, as we get more knowledge about this issue, we should also try to propagate it. We should spread the word, let people know about it. It is real. And the more we know, the better we are prepared to address this issue. So my final word would be, do your bit as much as you can, because those bits will add up and become something very significant in addressing the big problem. Yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, Amit.
Yes, I think that we have to replace gas burning furnace with electric heat pumps. We have to think of induction cooktops instead of gas stoves. We have to think of green roof, green buildings, and last but not the least, create social awareness on climate change, which we are doing and which we want others should also do the same, social awareness.
Great. Very precise and very clear. Thank you. Ali.
Yeah, for the panel, for the participants, I would suggest, I guess, what I mentioned before is to be more involved within your local jurisdiction. If you care about climate action, just make sure your council knows that and support their plans and their transitions, and because that makes a lot of difference in trying to implement them on the ground and adopt such plans. That's it for me.
And I guess it encourage your kids and your students to go to council because it's effective. That's great. Andrew.
Yeah, I guess advice for students. I mean, this is going to be the largest industry in human history to decarbonize, or maybe since the Industrial Revolution. I guess I was a little bit ambitious in saying in all history, to decarbonize our economies. And there's really three areas that you can focus on. One is working with the utility sector. That's where the money is, in terms of fueling change. The second is entrepreneurial. And And I think that question about, the effects of the Russian invasion and how quickly can we respond, that's where the entrepreneurial side comes. And it's on the customer side of the meter, coming up with new ways of very quickly responding. And then the third area, and I strongly encourage consideration of this, is work in public policy. So there are 5 levels of government in Canada. I think the most exciting one is Indigenous governments, because they've got a 7-generation value set that what we do today needs to benefit 7 generations. So working for your city, your county or regional district, your provincial territorial government, your Indigenous government, and the federal government. There's going to be a lot of work in that area, and Yorkville graduates will be sought after, especially with credentials such as a certified energy manager, along with your business degree. Thank you.
That's great, Andrew. Thank you. All right, and Lillian, give us your final thoughts from and thank you for staying with us. It's now 11:30 in Nigeria.
Okay, I'm not sure what disciplines our participants are from, but I'd like to say that there's a lot of potential in using the humanities to push the message of climate change. There's a lot of technical, scientific, applied data information, but there's a lot of gap in using arts, media, and other creative forms of communication to push the message of climate change, the risk, resilience, adaptation, mitigation, all that it relates to. So I would encourage everyone to find that beat within their expertise or their pursuits to see how they can communicate climate change away from the very scientific and technical information that forms the majority of what is out there today.
Well, thank you very much.
So
Well,
the humanities do play a part, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How about
So
you,
I want to thank
Peter?
everybody, and on behalf of all the participants today, I want to really thank the panelists. You've brought some really interesting insights from your different perspectives, and I think it was a great discussion. And then thank you very much those who participated today. You had lots of good questions. I hope they were answered. We'll maybe look to do another one of these in the fall, because we've got a good team now. We call ourselves a green team, so we're going to continue to keep at it with Jill's help. So Jill, you got any final comments about certificates?
Well, the certificates will go out in the next day or two with a copy of the video recording of this session. So you should all get a certificate from Yorkville University for your professional development participation. And I'd just like to thank everyone for your insightful comments. I know I learned something here. I was motivated to turn off my lights, not just by my power bill, but that I received yesterday. And I was like, why did this go up so much? Oh, you're working from home. To your insights about education. And I think that we can do more. And Peter, I'm curious about where that certificate or project is going for students to, and faculty maybe, to do a sustainability certificate.
Yep. Well, it's something I'm in discussion with the president about, so we'll hopefully can do that. Yeah.
Okay, so hopefully we'll have that, and we'll add the arts and humanities and business reps to this conversation next time. But I think we've covered it very well from continent to continent, coast to coast, and within our own university today. So thanks so much for joining us, everyone.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Jill.
Bye now.
Thank you, panelists.
Thanks, Lillian.
Thank you so much.
Ellie.
Bye.
Bye,
Take care.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.